Wow, it's nice to see such a big group. Last time I was here was in June of 2019, and it was just myself and Denise, my wife, was with me, and I think John Glock and Nathan Griffiths and maybe Steve Price were here to talk about some of these service organizations. And the ones that weren't here were my bosses, the board. So I could tell different things back then than I can tell this morning. So anyway, thank you for coming out this morning. And thank you to the folks here at Northgate for such a warm welcome and their hospitality. There is work involved in this, and we know that, and we really appreciate it. I thought I was wired up here. Is that better? Okay, is that better? Okay. So we appreciate you being out this morning, and we appreciate all the work that's been done in advance for this. I want to talk to you this morning a little bit about Stewards Foundation. I'm curious, how many of you in the audience have known of Stewards Foundation over a period of time? Okay, so quite a few. So y'all can come up and do the presentation. I put the verse up here that we like to use as a theme verse. And in fact, a number of organizations who have stewards in their name like this verse as well. You know, we really do ultimately want to be faithful to the Lord. We want to be good stewards. And so we kind of cling to this verse, and we remind ourselves of it frequently because we are stewards of what the Lord has given us. We don't view it as ours. We view it as His. And we like to think that what we're doing is using it for the Lord's work. So Stewards Foundation has now been around for 79 years as of March 26th of this year. We've been around for 79 years. What do we do? Well, we loan money. That's the purpose. Stewards Foundation was started to offer loans to assemblies, to construct buildings or to purchase buildings. And so in a real sense, we're involved in building foundations. Now, I'm an architect, and so I've seen a lot of foundations constructed in my lifetime. And so there's a lot of effort put into that. To construct a foundation the right way is important, isn't it? As one has said, you start wrong and it's hard to get it right. So if the foundation's not square, it's not properly designed and constructed, but what goes on top of it may not look so good eventually. It may be pretty, but it may fail at some point. But we're really more interested in building spiritual foundations than just concrete foundations. And so our desire is to see assemblies across the United States, testimonies of the Lord's people encouraged spiritually and built up spiritually. And that's something we've been doing, as I said, from 1945. Loan program began in 45, and you can see here, first year, $11,000 or so. Of course, that was a lot of money back in 1945. And over the years, we've loaned out now over $111 million to assemblies across the United States for the construction or purchase of assembly structures. That's a lot of money too. And sometimes people are surprised at how much we've given, and frankly, I'm surprised when I see the numbers. But the reality is, again, it's the Lord's money. It's the work that the Lord has done over these years. You know, the man that began Stewards Foundation, or was instrumental in that, William McCartney, he had an experience early in his professional career where his home assembly was in need of a new building or an expanded, enlarged building. And they had a meeting to discuss how they would finance that building. And during that meeting, the question was asked, well, why don't we just go to the bank and borrow money? And the response was, well, you know, banks are not that amenable to loaning money to assemblies. And the reason for that is because there's no structure where the bank can lay hold on the man or certain people in that group in case there's a failure. And so Mr. McCartney reasoned that the best approach would be to give some money, and then invest in the banks or a bank. And he did that, and the bank failed and he lost all his money. But the other way that that project was funded was through the sale of bonds or notes to those in the assembly fellowship. And so those folks who invested in that work not only received their principal back, but they earned something on the principal. There was a return on their investment. Not just a financial return, of course, but they saw what the Lord did with the money. And so did Mr. McCartney. And he recognized at that point in his life that there was an opportunity to offer to Christians a way to invest in the Lord's work. And that way was through the sale of bonds, so that Stewards Foundation became a channel through which funds could flow from those who were willing to invest to those who had a need. And that's what we still do today. Now, we don't do it in quite the same way because we don't currently have an investment opportunity. We're working on that. We have something that's out there. I want to mention that a little bit later. So here's the question then. Why not go to the bank for a loan? What's the difference really in going to the bank and Stewards Foundation for a loan? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, way back when the question was asked in Mr. McCartney's presence about the bank, the issue became one of a guarantee on the loan. How's the loan guaranteed? And that's what a bank always wants to know. How's this loan going to be guaranteed? Well, banks, if you go to them today for a commercial loan, and that's what these are, commercial loans, they're going to want to know how the loan is guaranteed. And if it's a church body, they're probably going to ask for the financial information on maybe the 5 or 10 largest donors to the church. And everybody wants to send the bank their financial information, right? Tax returns, bank statements. But that's what a bank often will want, a personal guarantee or personal guarantees. We won't ask for that. In fact, we've had people offer that, and I've said, no, we won't do that. And here's the reason why. If you do that, if somebody out here was going to personally guarantee a loan for their assembly, what happens if you get a little sideways with that assembly and you leave? Guess what follows you? That personal guarantee for that assembly that you just left. What happens if you die? Guess what follows your estate? Personal guarantee. So we won't do that. Not only that, but we don't have a prepayment penalty. If you go to a bank today and you ask for a commercial loan, they most likely will have a prepayment penalty for that loan. Why is that? Because if you pay the loan off early, guess what the bank doesn't benefit from? All the interest. If the loan ran the whole way through the amortization. But that's not really our first concern. Our first concern is the assembly and how they're benefited from the loan. And if it benefits them to pay the loan off early and reduce the total interest they've paid, good. Good for them. And so there's no prepayment penalties. We don't have fees. We don't have late penalties. You know, it's possible that an assembly can hit a rough patch financially. And COVID was one of those times. And during COVID, we contacted all of our loan holders and we said, if you need it, we can give you some extra time on your payments. And some took advantage of that. They weren't meeting personally, and so it was more difficult. The money wasn't coming in quite the same. If there's a problem, if there's a difficulty, then we want to be the helper, not the hammer. We don't want to go after an assembly. If we ultimately have to, we will, but we don't want to. When I started at Stewards Foundation in 2010, it really wasn't something I was looking to do. As I said, I'm an architect. I had my own practice. And I was in the process of rethinking what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to continue to be a sole proprietor or whether I wanted to go to work for another architectural firm. One of the things that always bothered me in my practice was that because I was feeding a family, it was difficult to give away a lot of my time. So when an assembly would come to me and say, you know, we want to design and construct a building, I'd do everything I could to help them, but ultimately I couldn't just give away all my time. Well, guess what I can do now? I can give away my time. And I'm happy to do that. So one of the things that I've tried to emphasize since I've been at Stewards Foundation is we're a resource. We're not just a lender. So if you have a project and you don't know how architects work, how contracts work, how builders work, you don't understand those things, I would say I do, but there's probably things I don't understand entirely. But I'm more than happy to help you. And that's irrespective of whether you borrow money from us or not. That's not the point. The point is we like to help people. So we like to think of ourselves as not just a lender, but a resource. And a resource you can trust. You know, when you get into a relationship in a construction, a design and construction project, there's you, and there's the builder, and in the old school relationship, there's the architect. Well, who's on your side of the table? Well, the architect should be. But today there's so many projects that are what's called design build. So the designer and the builder are one and the same. So now you're on the side of the table by yourself. We'll be on your side of the table. And we'll take a look at things and we'll make recommendations for you. And there are all kinds of things today that are challenging. Cities are so hard to work with today. And one of the reasons for that is because they're not that anxious to see church structures erected in their city. And one of the primary reasons for that is they don't get tax revenue off of it. Now, it used to be you could build a school or a church in any zoning district in a city. Not so much anymore. Still have to have schools, but we don't have to have churches because we really don't care about the moral influence of the church in our community. And so zoning boards and building officials, you know, they're maybe going to help you, maybe not. So there are challenges when it comes to these things. Can we always help you clear the hurdle? No. But we certainly can help guide the way. We certainly can help answer questions. So we like to think that we can be a trusted resource in the sense of helping an assembly, partnering with an assembly that has a project. Well, many of you will know that, in fact, we were just talking about this when Denise and I were up here in 2019. We actually drove to Centralia, we went to Riverton, we went to Auburn, and we found the hospitals that Stewards Foundation once owned. They're a little different now. Maynard we never could find. It was more down in the city and I think probably was a part of a redevelopment project, so couldn't find Maynard. But Stewards Foundation either owned or operated 6 hospitals, 4 in this area, 2 in the Chicago area. So beginning in 1953, Stewards Foundation was in the hospital business. The question rightfully could have been asked, why in the world would Stewards Foundation be in the hospital business? Mr. McCartney was quite the entrepreneur. And so he had a realtor that was often on the lookout for good opportunities, you know, to purchase, to invest in land. And apparently he approached him one day and said, you want to buy a hospital? And I can imagine he looked at him and said, why would you bring me that? But he was also a man that was always thinking about the gospel, thinking about how New Testament patterned assemblies could be helped and benefited, thinking about the Lord's servants. And so he began to think this through, and he said, you know, hospitals provide care for sick people physically, but the chances are most of them that come in have spiritual issues as well, spiritual sickness. And so what he decided was if he owned the hospital, Stewards Foundation owned the hospital, they could put a chaplain in those hospitals, and everybody that came in could hear the gospel. Oh, great idea. Now this is in the 50s, and if you think back to what was going on in the mission fields during that time, guess what was happening like in Zambia, hospitals, right? So you need doctors, you need nurses that are trained. So we also thought, well, we can use these hospitals for the benefit of training nurses and doctors if they want to go to the mission field. And finally, he decided that it would be a good opportunity to serve those who are serving the Lord. And so he said, you know, we can offer them medical services at either a very reduced cost or for free. And so the hospitals then were used in that way. Well, our good friends in the IRS ultimately kind of put the kibosh on some of the things that Mr. McCartney wanted to do. He was kind of a freewheeler, free thinker. And he felt like it should be Stewards Foundation's prerogative to decide how they used the money from these hospitals. And often he wanted to use that money to move it from one hospital to the other, or from one hospital to Stewards Foundation. And guess what? Those are nonprofits. And IRS said, no, you can't do that. You can't just mix all that money. Ultimately, the hospitals were all sold in 1982. And once that happened, then the question became, well, how do we continue to help the Lord's servants, commended workers? And for a period of time, Stewards Foundation paid for all the medical expenses of commended workers. But there came a point in time when that became overwhelmingly expensive, so that by the early mid-90s, they were spending over $2 million a year on medical expenses. And so the question then became, well, we have this primary purpose of having funds available for assemblies so that they can purchase or construct buildings for loans. And if we continue to give away the principal fund, then we're not going to be able to do that anymore. So they had to make a decision, the board did, a tough decision, about how to continue to assist commended workers and still be able to continue with the core purpose of Stewards Foundation. Well, the healthcare assistance program was the answer. So beginning in 1995, that program was established as a gift program. And that's what we continue to do today. We continue to give to commended workers that are part of the healthcare assistance program, or HCAP, as we refer to it, to assist with their medical expenses. It's not insurance. And the assembly that receives the funds to direct to their commended workers in that program may use it for insurance premiums. That's up to the elders of that assembly. But ultimately, our goal in this is to assist commended workers and to get the money into their hands so that they can use it to offset some of their medical expenses. Well, you can see since 1989, we've given away in excess of $26 million towards that program. That does include those years when we were paying all the bills. And more recently then, $16.5 million has been given for the healthcare assistance program. Well, I mentioned that Stewards Foundation began through the sale of bonds. And a part of the resources of Stewards Foundation, probably the vast majority of it, even today, came from those bonds, the sale of those bonds. In mid-90s, that program, the bonds were converted to a demand note program. And in 2013, the demand note program was shut down, primarily because of all of the regulations, the legal issues that come with offering securities. And so we then said, well, if you want to support Stewards Foundation, the way you can do that is through planned giving. An annuity, obviously you can send money, but an annuity which would benefit both you and Stewards Foundation. So there's charitable gift annuities, there's deferred charitable gift annuities, charitable remainder trust, those things that would benefit both the giver and Stewards Foundation. Now, I said a minute ago, there's something that we've just launched recently. We're still working through it, but it's a new demand note program. And while the initial bonds that were sold back in 45 and going forward were intended for Stewards Foundation's loans, this new program is directed entirely to the healthcare assistance program. So the goal here is to raise more money so we can give more money, and so we can expand that program. That's the desire. So we can help more commended workers. Is it going to earn you, the assembly? Right now, it's just for member assemblies. Is it going to earn the assembly a lot of money in return? Not a lot, but the focus is not on the return, the focus is on the giving at our end to assist more commended workers. So that's another option. If you're interested in that, there's a brochure out on the table. Pick one up, and if you have questions, more detailed questions, I'll be more than happy to visit with you about that. What's our purpose really, ultimately? Our purpose is to serve, and it's to serve New Testament patterned assemblies. And the way we do that primarily is what we call through member assemblies. And we all squirm a little bit when we hear that word member, don't we? It's not the way we generally think of our gatherings. But it's a word that comes directly out of our Articles of Incorporation back from 1945. And you can see in this list what's involved in membership at Stewards Foundation. Location in the United States, gathered in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ alone, organized and operated in accordance with the biblical principles. So our focus primarily is on serving member assemblies and their commended workers. Still is, and it will continue to be. Now, there's information about us at stewardsfoundation.org. I think Quincy mentioned that he'd been there and sent snippets out to some of the leadership here at Northgate about Stewards Foundation. But if you want to know more about us, you can find it there. Finally, I have about a 9-minute video I'd like to play. Is there a way we can? Yeah, thanks.
On March 26, 1945, led by William McCartney, 5 men signed the Articles of Incorporation to establish a new nonprofit corporation in Chicago, Illinois. In the truest sense of the word, Stewards Foundation became a channel through which funds from those who had money to invest, a willingness to invest in the Lord's work, to assemblies of the Lord's people who had a need for funding.
It was back in the 40s, little non-denominational churches, they were having difficulty if they were wanting to buy or renovate or build, going to a bank and the bank's considering them to be a viable risk. So he hatched this plan, he and some others, to put in some seed money and loan that money to assemblies.
This was the way in which Stewards Foundation began, and it continues today as a service organization that supports New Testament pattern assemblies through loans that help with the purchase or construction or expansion of an existing testimony.
Having an organization that understands, the mission of a small chapel, that understands the teachings, what the Bible teaches us, it just made using Steward Foundation so much easier.
1956, we made our first loan. Our history with Stewards has been glorious. And so we just know the Lord raised up stewards for such a time as that and for such a time as this.
One of the things that stands out to me when I think of Stewards Foundation is that the Lord truly works through his people to meet the needs of his people.
Working with banks, it wasn't much of an option. The banks were very flat out and honest and says that we do not lend money to chapels.
The thing we liked about Stewards Foundation was this using the property as the guarantee instead of a personal guarantee on an individual.
If you approach a bank, they have primarily no understanding what an assembly stands for. Our convictions and our purposes are not very well understood by the bank.
One of the larger commercial banks we went to, we asked them if they could lend us the money, and they said that they wouldn't lend to any church unless it was 900 members or larger. It's very difficult to get a loan from your local banks in your community, and Stewards Foundation is always there for you.
After researching the various places, the banks, we found that the bank's interest was mainly dollars and cents. Stewards' interest was definitely support As a church, we're always big on what we're putting our money into, and we recognize that with Stewards, we were putting our money into strengthening their ministry.
We checked with the bank, and with their requirement, we knew we are not going to qualify. So we approached the Stewards Foundation, and they worked along with us to produce all the necessary papers and things like that, and the loan was granted.
We began to struggle about how we were going to get a building loan, and we approached Stewards Foundation. From the outset, they were very willing to give us a loan, and we began to go through that process, and ultimately we secured a loan to build our building.
Stewards Foundation was a clear front runner in knowing what we really needed as an assembly. They are from the same background. They know the challenges and the concerns that we have, whereas a bank really is just looking at the bottom line. So we appreciate the humanity involved in the Stewards option for us.
The thing that came through that we appreciated was the sense that they appreciated assemblies and wanted to help encourage the assemblies in their building needs and building progress. And so as we worked through that process, we really appreciated the help of Stewards Foundation. And they went from being, yes, we will need to include them at some point, to helping us to understand the vital part of being a partner in the process.
An added benefit to using a Steward Foundation was that it's not just a financial aspect like a bank just normally does. An added benefit to using the Steward Foundation was simply that they assisted us, with the managing, the scope of our project. We had grandiose plans, big plans to, build a huge, facility, but we could only afford so much. And Steward Foundation was very helpful in making us see that.
The other benefit is they have the resources, they have the experience to know what to look for. They were very helpful when they looked at the plat. They were able to see some high-risk things that might be a problem with the city.
Once we decided to go with Stewards, they had us put in an application just as the banks did, but they were looking at our finances, they were looking at our long-term plan and long-term goal for the project. What we were really blessed was that they weren't just interested in getting the money to get a loan, to get interest and get the payment, but they walked with us hand in hand in aiding us in being good stewards in the project.
Stewards Foundation was helpful for us to understand, I'm going to call it the lean process of understanding how to go about structuring our contracts and getting the draws and payment sets up so that every dollar that we spent was accounted for and handled with the proper contracts and under the proper conditions, that we maintained our clear and free lien position.
From beginning to end, they're always looking to make sure that we were getting what we needed, and we appreciated that.
The Healthcare Assistance Program, or HCAP as we know it, is a program designed to assist commended workers offset the expense of healthcare. But it's important to note that it's the loan proceeds primarily that support this program. So every time an assembly takes out a loan with Stewards Foundation, it provides a source of funding for HCAP.
They support commended workers with respect to medical expenses. So we know that the money we give is going toward people that are furthering the gospel and ministry.
We are grateful for the healthcare assistance program that's provided by Stewards Foundation over the years that allowed us to focus on our ministry and gave us great peace of mind.
When we meet with newly commended workers and their elders, we specifically mention that Stewards Foundation has this program to help offset medical expenses that they may incur on the field.
I'm so thankful to the Lord for the Stewards Foundations, for all the help that went to us, to Larry and Naomi. And I thank the Lord constantly for you all that have a part in this ministry.
We are grateful to Stewards Foundation for the healthcare assistance program that we've been a part of through the years. It gives us real peace of mind to know there's organizations like Stewards that stands behind us.
Understand that if you go through Stewards Foundation, the interest on that loan will go to people that you know to assist them with their healthcare needs. So that the bank can't compete with that.
Total, we had 4 loans over these years, And in all 4 loans, Steward Foundation was very helpful. They were doing everything possible within their powers to help us and approve the loan. And that's what we were able to grow as we did now.
Since we received the first loan from Stewards, the community has grown and Land O'Lakes Bible Chapel has grown. And as we built the second expansion, it's grown even further. In this building, be able to have a lot of different ministries, children's ministries, adult ministries. We've seen people saved. It would never be possible outside of the loans we receive from Stewards Foundation.
Throughout the loan process, it's literally not just like we're making a monthly payment and getting a statement. Stewards has continued to be a partner with us just through the process from the loan inception and even now that we're in the repayment time of the loan.
Just as Stewards have been good to us and gracious to us in the past, it's the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes, and we'll look forward to working with Stewards Foundation for years to come.
We like the fact that, in case there's a future need, we know that they're there. The doors are available. We know what we have. We've worked with them already in the past, and we cherish the partnership that we've had for the past 10 years with Steward Foundation.
I think if you look at Stewards Foundation today and where we are, we have remained true to where Mr. McCartney and the original founder's vision was. And I think that that is because there is this love of the Lord, love of the Lord's people, and the love for New Testament principles.
All right, so I failed to do this at the beginning, but let me just say that what we'll do, Rob Sullivan is going to come and talk about CMML and Legacy Ministry Services. And after he's done that, we'll take a break, about a 15-minute break, give you a chance to get up, stretch your legs, restrooms, whatever. And then we'll come back and we'll have a question and answer session. So if you have questions, that'll be the time. So, Rob, I turn it over to you.
Well, good morning. Nice to be with you. By the way, I'm supposed to send greetings to you from Mr. John Glock, if you know John, and also from John Peasland. You may not know John. Well, John was here a few years ago, so, but let me get this set up. Excuse me. Fighting some allergies here. So we'll start off with Legacy Ministry Services, and then we'll go to CMML. Anyway, it's nice to be with y'all, and I'll try to do both of these. John Peasland was originally going to come and talk about CMML, but we've had him all over the place, so we're giving him a little time with his family, so his kids don't forget who he is, since he's traveling so much. And frankly, the same thing with John Glock, who we thought about sending him to do this particular presentation. So I will cover both. And it's nice to be with you. So Legacy Ministry Services, just a little background on our history. We actually go back to Emmaus Bible College. We were launched in 1988 under the name of Emmaus Trust Services. And the brother who was chiefly the founder was the person who effectively was acting as their CFO, a brother by the name of Dave Allison. Dave Allison was a missionary kid out of Zimbabwe, and he was working with Emmaus at the time, he and his wife Lorraine, and he had this idea, and indeed the board had the idea at the time, that it would be important to encourage Christians to remember the Lord's work as part of their estate planning. And he did that for 12 years under the guise of Emmaus Trust Services. Rather quickly, though, it became apparent to the board of directors and to Dave Allison that people may think you're really trying to raise money for Emmaus Bible College when you're trying to encourage them to remember the Lord's work as part of their estate planning. So over the course of that decade, the college made the decision to separate it as a separate entity, and they gave it the name Believers Stewardship Services. And it started a history of my organization having names that have lots of syllables. So you can see we've got a much better, less syllables now in legacy ministry services. So we just love lots of syllables here. But that was in 2001. Now, just since your chapel here has had some involvement with Emmaus, and give you a sense of the timing, it was at that point that Emmaus was also spinning off the Emmaus Correspondence School. It was Emmaus Worldwide Today. So they spun off Emmaus Correspondence School, and they spun off Believers Stewardship Services. And our focus was very much to do exactly what the founders' intention was, which was to help Christians remember the Lord's work as part of their estate planning. Statistics will say to this day about half of us in this room do not have an estate plan that is set up. Now, believe it or not, you all have an estate plan. It's just whether it's one that is of your own choosing or not. Because if you have not set up your estate plan, I assure you the state of Washington has. And something tells me that the state of Washington will probably not remember the Lord's work in the adjudication of your estate. It will be dictated by laws which involve your relatives, and of course, those are good things to remember your relatives as part of your estate plan. But understand that so much of the giving that goes to the Lord's work comes as a result of Christians who've remembered the Lord's work as part of their estate planning. So BSS was very much founded with that goal in mind. Now, BSS has had a historic problem that, frankly, a lot of ministries have had, particularly as we go on in time, which is that so much of estate planning and support of the Lord's work is very much based off of the idea that your people understand that ultimately they're stewards. Psalm 24 verse 1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and all the fullness thereof." That doesn't just mean the land and the trees and the waters. It means the Lord owns everything. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, which is true, and it's a wonderful euphemism for the fact that he also happens to own your Ford Explorer. He happens to own your IRA accounts. He happens to own your home. He owns everything. You're just a steward of it. So to the extent that the body of Christ and believers understand that ultimately their wealth is really his, well, it makes it so that if you have a body of believers who understand that ultimately they are just caretakers of the Lord's wealth, then our jobs become a little bit easier because we're helping the stewards know how to go about using their wealth to support the Lord's work. Your family is the Lord's work, by the way. Supporting your family is a big part of that. But is there some portion in your estate planning that would cause you to think about the Lord's work? Everything that you could think of, whether it's CMML or Stewards Foundation, if you learned about, or Emmaus Bible College, all came about because Christians felt led of the Lord to start works. And that meant putting funds into those works. So Legacy Ministry Services, Believers Stewardship Services, we changed our name just last year. A little more about our history. So in 2010, we were helping a number of Christians with estate plans, and we're also helping them with creative ways to support the Lord's work. We were increasingly asked by the people who we were helping with their estate plans to help them with the management of their funds. So at that point, back in 2010, Believers Stewardship Services became a registered investment advisory firm where we helped Christians with their investments. And a few years back, we now were spinning off an entity. The way Emmaus had spun off us off, we then spun off our registered investment advisory firm and created Stewards Advisory Services, which Skip is on the board of that, as well as Legacy Ministry Services and Stewards Foundation. Anyway, that was in 2020. And then last year we changed our name and became Steward or Legacy Ministry Services. So just a little bit, tell you a little story. Did you know that the Brown University, you say, where's this going? Did you know that Brown University was founded by Baptists? as a seminary for Baptists. Did you know that Columbia University was founded as originally King's College? And at the time, there's writings where people thought they were naming it after the King of England. They weren't naming it after the King of England. You know who they were naming it after? King Jesus. It was set up by the Anglicans to be a seminary. Dartmouth was founded by the Congregationalists. Harvard was founded by the Puritans, which later became the Congregationalists. Princeton was founded by who? The Presbyterians. Yale was founded by the Congregationalists. All of these schools were essentially set up to be seminaries, to teach young men who were going into the clergy as to how to shepherd the flock with the Word of God. University of Pennsylvania was not originally set up as a seminary. It was actually originally set up as a law school. But do you know who its founder was? George Whitefield, the same one who was behind the Great Awakening. Benjamin Franklin later got involved. Let me read to you the mottos of these schools that are still their mottos, strangely enough, to this day. Brown's motto is "In God We Hope." Columbia's motto is "In Thy light shall we see the light." Dartmouth's motto is "The voice of one crying in the wilderness." Harvard's motto, hold on to your seats, "Truth for Christ and Church." In fact, when you enter the old gate of Harvard, you can see that slogan right there, "Truth for Christ and Church." Princeton's motto was and is "Under the protection of God she flourishes." Yale is "Light and Truth," a reference to the Gospel of John. And Pennsylvania, which was originally a law school, had as its motto, "Law without morality is useless." Just recently, the Christian Union, which is an evangelistic group set up for Ivy League students, was banned on half of the Ivy League campuses because they were trying to distribute something so terrible as this. They were trying to give away C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And they were banned by half of the Ivy League schools because it was viewed as hate literature. Now, what am I getting at here? This is not a statement about the United States and where we've come from and where we're going. But it is a statement about this. Somewhere along the line, the boards of those schools, which were entrusted with the sacred responsibility to make sure that these schools remained true to the Scripture, somewhere along the line, they allowed people to get on their boards who didn't view these things the same way. They didn't take care of the stewardship that was entrusted to them. They were given the responsibility for these schools that would become the most influential schools in the country's history. And yet, they didn't tend to the inheritance, so to speak. I'll tell you another story. Anybody ever hear the name of Henry Crowell? Wife was named Susan. Well, they are the founders of Quaker Oats. Now, Henry and Susan Crowell were very active for the gospel. They didn't name their company Quaker Oats because they were Quakers. It's where the town in Pennsylvania was located that was their main mill. They gave away 70% of their income. Henry Crowell's best friend was somebody you've all heard of, Dwight L. Moody. Best of friends. He, along with 14 other businessmen who were all born-again, Bible-believing Christians in Chicago, formed the Committee of 15. And they're the ones who cleaned up Chicago's red light district back at the turn of the 18th to the 19th to the 20th centuries. Sure enough, it's Quaker Oats money, Crowell money, that helped found Moody Bible Institute in 1886, largely funded by Quaker Oats and the Crowells. Incidentally, Brother Crowell was the chairman of the board of Moody Bible Institute for 40 years. Incidentally, they were Presbyterians who left the Presbyterian Church because they saw it starting to drift away from the gospel. Kroll was very big behind missions. And so much so that he and his wife funded an organization called the Kroll Trust. You know, at the start of each meeting of the Kroll Trust, they sit down and they read the purpose of Kroll Trust. To this day, the purpose of the Kroll Trust is to actively fund the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ around the world. Well, you know what? To this day, they are heavy in funding the advance of the gospel around the world. This company that came out of Quaker Oats. The Krolls were better stewards in who they chose to replace them and what they chose to do with their wealth than the founders of Harvard. And now, let's not pick on the founders of Harvard too much. It wasn't the founders of Harvard that made the mistake. It was 4 generations later that they started this big drift. What I'm getting at is that was the stewardship they had, but each of you have a stewardship as well. And what are you going to do to make sure that that stewardship before the Lord is and the wealth that you're entrusted with before the Lord is used in a way that's going to honor Him? So we're big on helping Christians with estate planning. And we would love to help you in your estate planning if you have some interest in supporting the Lord's work. If you have no interest in supporting the Lord's work, then you can plenty of lawyers that will that help you. And by the way, we're not going to tell you what aspect of the Lord's work to support. We're not here to raise money for Legacy Ministry Services or anybody else. But if you have a heart and you want to see that some of your wealth is used to support the Lord's work, we would love to help you. Now, let me tell you a little story. Another little story. Estate planning for ministries is a nightmare. You know why it's a nightmare? Because every state has little nuances and little differences to them. Your state has totally different estate planning taxes than the rest of the country. And your state's pretty rough, by the way. You probably know this. You know, the federal estate tax level is a little over about 13.7 million right now for 2024. So that means if you have an estate plan that's worth 13.7 million, you're just going to come in the wire and not have to pay federal taxes on your estate plan. And so, well, who in the room's got 13.7 million? You might. You know that Washington, though, you know what your state tax level is in Washington? It's 2.9 million. You are really, really low. And that's a hefty, hefty fee. You have 2.9 million. Your tax rate could go as high as 18%. So now there's lots of nuances to it. But the thing is this. We want to help Christians set up their estate plans, and we have just signed on to an outfit called Free Will. Let's see if I've got this. I may have skipped my slide here. We've just signed up an outfit called freewill.com. Freewill.com basically is an online service that we are now partnered with, where if you use freewill.com under our auspices, if you go to our website and use freewill.com, they will set up your estate plan for a really good price. You know what it is? It's free. Totally free. And the nice thing about freewill.com is that the way their software protocol works is that they have a Washington state template. So it knows exactly what is needed for you to have an estate plan set up that is completely compliant with Washington laws. And we'll help you walk through that process. So anyway, that's one of the things we do. We also are, will help with the setup of planned giving instruments, little stats about giving in the country. Do you think the United States is as generous as it used to be? Here's an interesting thing. Last year, the United States gave away, individuals, private giving, $485 billion in charitable giving. Your country is incredibly generous. Even with all the crazy things that is going on in the world, this country still remains about the most generous nation on the face of the earth. Last year, corporations in the United States gave away $21 billion. You know who gave away the other $460 billion? People. So corporate America gave $21 billion away. The rest was given by individuals. Now, 91 billion came as a result of foundation giving, 46 billion came from estates, 327 billion came from individuals. Now, here's something that's really interesting. You may think in your mind, the World War II generation, extremely generous. By the way, they were. And they've largely passed into the night, right? Baby boomers are actually pretty generous. The funny thing is we watch things going on. Even millennials and Gen Z and Gen Y, they're starting to get the giving bug, except they don't give the way we give. You have an offering on Sunday, you probably still have the basket that goes around. We have the basket that goes around, and people give, they probably put what in the basket, right? Put checks in the basket? That's not the way the 20-somethings give anymore. I don't know if you know this, but like my chapel, more than half of our giving now occurs through Zelle. They don't even know how to write a check. We were joking with Scott, who's the chairman of the board of Stewards. He's got younger people on his staff that have never written a check in their life, but they know how to use Zelle. They know how to use those type of things. So anyway, all this to say, we help Christians with planned giving, creative ways to give to the Lord's work that are tax advantageous. And we have lots of different instruments we can help you with. You go up to Emmaus Bible College and you say, I got a bunch of stocks. I'd like to give, I bought this little thing called Microsoft when it was a little fledgling garage outfit, and now I own some shares of Microsoft or whatever. You go up to Emmaus Bible College and say, I'd like to give you shares of stock. A lot of charities are not positioned to receive stock, but we are. We can take stock and we can take property, and we've had some very interesting gifts come to us. We've had mineral rights come to us. Now, they're not coming to us. What they're coming is through us to ministries down the road. And by the way, we don't charge anything for processing the gifts and sending them on. Anyway, all that's to say we help with planned giving. The other area of our big support is assembly and ministry support. We live in an environment that is increasingly hostile towards little churches. You may not know this. You're part of this is a New Testament pattern in assembly. About 960 of these in the U.S. Did you know about 960 assemblies in the U.S.? And increasingly what we're seeing is that local municipalities are going after chapels over property tax exemptions because they're not recognizing what is this, the assembly thing? You're not part of the Catholic Church or the Baptist. What exactly are you anyway? So we've seen it in New York. We've had 2 assemblies, and we've seen one in this area where the local municipalities have gone after the assembly, challenging their property tax exemption status. There's an increasing hostility out there. We've seen a chapel in New Jersey that was, well, let's just say the local municipality did not want the chapel to participate in a community fair because they were viewed as being having a traditional view of marriage. And the local community threatened them, saying that you don't support LGBTQ rights, therefore you're barred from participating in the community event. So that chapel contacted us, and because we have extensive legal contacts, we were able to help them and make it so that they are not barred from the local community event. That's one of the things we also do, which is we help with legal advice on religious liberty issues. We have a relationship with an outfit called Nelson Mullins, which is a big law firm. So if you often see these religious liberty cases, often they're Nelson Mullins attorneys that are walking in on behalf of the Alliance Defending Freedom, or ACLJ. And we have a relationship with them. We have lawyers that work with us. I'll tell you something else that we're increasingly seeing is our camps are running into trouble. You've got a Bible camp that I take it you're very involved with around here, Lakeside. We've seen 4 camps in the southeast of the U.S. recently lose their tax exempt status. And we're helping with that. Now, in this case, it's not the government going after them. In this case, it's the camps did not keep filling out their 990 forms, which is a tax obligation they have to do. If you miss that 3 consecutive years, you'll lose your tax exempt status. So now all of the gifting that comes in, you can no longer issue a tax deductible receipt. So we do a lot of work in the space of helping different ministries with different governance issues. One of the more difficult things we've recently got involved with in our ministry support has to do with asset dissolution. Coming out of COVID, a number of assemblies did not survive. There were 7 assemblies that closed across the U.S. coming out of COVID in the year 2022 that we helped the corporation dissolve and make sure that the assets were continued to be used for the Lord's work. Last year we did 5. Right now we're doing another 4. Anyway, that's something we are available for. We also help with governance issues if you need assistance on your bylaws. I don't know if you've watched what's going on up in Canada now. Canada has recently passed this thing that's scaring the daylights out of the Canadian assemblies, that unless you have formally documented bylaws, that the province that you're in will issue bylaws for you. There's been a scrambling effort going on by a sister ministry of ours to get each of the 450 assemblies north of the border so they have documented bylaws. There's some fear, some states rumbling in that. And the big problem with that is the bylaws that they will set up as if the chapel ever closes, if you don't have documented in your bylaws where the assets are to go, they go to the state. And that is increasingly, that is now law in Canada. And we know some states are looking at that. So if you don't have bylaws or you haven't looked at your bylaws in a while, let us help you. All you have to do is have the bylaws. Once you have the bylaws in place, it takes precedent. And we'll help you with that. So anyway, so all this is to say that if you need help with estate planning, there's information on the back. It's a free service we provide. We can help walk you through how to set up your estate plan. And that includes things like who's going to watch over your affairs if you're incapacitated. You know, who's going to take care of your financial affairs if you're incapacitated. Who's going to take care of your medical decisions. Now, I always say this to couples. You say, well, the default is going to be my spouse. Absolutely. That's what happens for the one that's left, though. The spouse that's left after the other spouse dies. You know, you want to make sure that you have that plan in place. You have some really prominent examples in history of people whose estate plans were an absolute mess. Nelson Mandela's estate plan was an absolute mess. He had no orders on file as to what to do. He was kept on life support for years and years. The worst example is probably Ariel Sharon, the former prime minister of, he's kept on life support for 13 years without brainwave activity. 13 years. So this is all part of a good state plan about end-of-life planning and the like. Anyway, that's how you can get a hold of me. Better yet, you get the brochures and the flyers in the back. We can help you with this, planned giving. We have a thing called donor-advised funds. Quite a bit of giving to the Lord's work now goes through donor-advised funds, and we can help you with those type of things. A way to give securities or property to the Lord's work. And again, you decide who you're giving to. We'll just help you in the process. So let me switch gears now. And I used to have this, Doug and I have this joke when we present with Phil Parsons, who's often representing CMML, that we'd talk about money and we'd talk about property, and then Phil Parsons would get up and he would start talking about CMML, and all the questions went CMML's way. So let's hope they all go Doug's way this day. But 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. CMML, does anybody know how old CMML is right now? No, I guess 102 years old. They were started in 1922 and largely started by the original founders of CMML largely go back to 3 fellas. There are different organizations that came together, but Sidney Perrin, Oscar Rickson, and George McKenzie. Oscar Rickson invented the automatic door opener, by the way. If you walk in the store and the thing opens up, that was originally invented by him in the 20s. George Mackenzie was smart. He saw that Oscar Rickson had invented the automatic door opener, and he decided, since it was being sold to the Gimbels and the Macy's of the world, he got the maintenance contracts for those automatic door openers. And Sidney Perrin, he, in the, well, let's just say in the 1910s, 1911s, he thought there might be a war coming, and he invested a lot in war stocks. And these, then World War I broke out, and probably pretty good investor. But these men put their money like crazy into the organization that started to help the U.S. assemblies send missionaries abroad. And you know what the problem was? Is World War I, you have all these veterans coming home. Same thing happened in World War II. They come home from the war, and they have a heart for the gospel, and they want to reach these people groups. So an assembly sends a missionary here, sends a missionary overseas. But how does an assembly sitting in the middle of Seattle in 1922 get funds to a missionary who's going to be dealing with the Zulus down in South Africa? You know, so there became a need for an organization that could handle those things that assemblies wouldn't necessarily have the expertise at. So why does CMML exist, and how do we accomplish our vision? We exist to advance the spread of the gospel globally. That's our vision. And our mission is by serving U.S. assemblies and their missionaries through engaged senders, enabled servants, and enthusiastic supporters. I'm very good friends, because I sit on a few boards with the Baptists. The Baptists are envious of the assemblies. You know why? Because we send out missionaries like crazy. And they do too, but nowhere near the per capita rate that we do. And CMML supports the assemblies. We're not the sending organization, we're a service organization. You know who the sending organization is? It's you. It's the assembly. You decide who's going on the field. You're the one who sends them on the field. Our job is just to support them. But you make the decision who goes and where they go. So 3 groups that we consider our constituency: the engaged sender. There are 190 commending assemblies right now. So there's 960 or so in the country. 190 of them have missionaries on the field right now. And we have an active donor base. Right now there are 225 missionaries commended from the U.S. assemblies that are active overseas. We have 58 that are refocused missionaries. So these are missionaries who, are moving on into the retirement phase. Then we also have another 300 associated missionaries and ministries. And what you want to think of here is, so what happens when our missionaries go overseas? Danny Johnson in Burundi. Danny Johnson, if you know the Johnson situation in Burundi, they've got a large hospital going on. So when Danny Johnson's called home to be with the Lord, years from now, he's a young man, but when they're called home to be with the Lord, that hospital's still going to be there. It's still going to be an assembly-run hospital. So we have an account for them. So they're one of the Shikaji School in Africa. That was started by assembly missionaries. We have an account for them. So about 300 ministries or missionaries that have gone out from U.S. assemblies, but they've gone with Wycliffe or New Tribes Missions, or they're faith-based. So they're not fundraising like some of the other groups do. So we'll help the U.S. assemblies support them as well. All told, we have 580 different accounts. Last year, we brought in $20 million in revenue. And that's coming, as you can see, heavily from the assemblies, some from estate gifts. And then we sent out about $19.5 million that went out to the different missionaries and associated ministries. And then we had about 1.7 for operational expenses, including the conferences we put on, the running of the missionary home, and of course the missions magazine, which you all get missions magazine. Does it mean not get missions magazine? Okay, if you don't get it, it's a publication we produce 11 times a year, and we tell stories about our missionaries overseas. If you'd like to get it, just give me your address. That's a free publication. CMML serves local New Testament assemblies and their missionaries that they commend to gospel work. We're faith-based, and our missionaries are faith-based. CMML and the missionaries we serve practice faith-based missions. Goes back to Norris Groves. Faith-based missions, meaning we look to the Lord alone to supply for their financial needs. This is very much the thing that distinguishes the assemblies from other missions groups. Other missions groups, you go out with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, you go out with Wycliffe, you go out with New Tribes. There's often a requirement placed by those organizations on the individual who's going into the work that they must fundraise. They must generate some basic support. One of my closest friends is a senior guy at Wycliffe. He has to fundraise. He has to have a level of funding that he's got guaranteed support from. We don't do that. It's not the way, faith-based missions. Our missionaries go out by faith. They trust the Lord. And CMML trusts the Lord for meeting its needs. And by the way, let me just show you something real quick. Trust in the Lord. Not $1 solicited. Lord, a good provider. He's a tremendous provider. He takes care of his workers. He takes care of his workers. And CMML is never solicited. Service organization, CMML exists to provide services to local assemblies who are not able to provide for themselves, as to support, care, and oversee their commended missionaries. So that's kind of the thing that distinguishes us. Let me show you this video. I'm going to kill the lights in the front now.
The Great Commission says that we're supposed to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that Jesus has commanded us. So we are very thankful for the prayers of people who have invested in building up the body of Christ. And we're especially thankful that people are passing from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God.
We've helped plant 12 assemblies in the last 7 years here in eastern Burundi. The national leaders countrywide had a little bit of a revival. There were about 120 assemblies in Burundi, and they've been able to plant about 50 assemblies. So there's 170 assemblies in Burundi currently.
Today, by God's grace, there is a growing church that is reaching out to their own people in many ways, such as through personal witness, a young women's vocational training center, a medical clinic, a ministry to street boys, a prison ministry, living in villages, building relationships, and showing and sharing Christ in a variety of creative ways.
So overall, we're just very thankful to be serving the Lord in this way, thankful for the opportunities and open doors. And we thank the Lord for all that he's doing in the hearts of children and in the hearts of Muslims to draw them to faith in Jesus Christ.
When assembly missionaries came to Korea, God blessed their work. And today, there are over 220 assemblies scattered nationwide. God is giving fruit.
The Lord is working all throughout North America. We see and hear wonderful stories of what he is doing. There are many who are considered unreached people groups, and God has placed us right here in the midst of them.
348 unreached people groups from around the world now reside in the United States and Canada. Well, the whole world has come to our doorstep now for the reaching of the next generation in North America. If we just have eyes to see it, he's leading his people, he's doing it.
We're very thankful that in the Lord our labor is not in vain, and people have responded to the gospel. Latin America is very open to the gospel as opposed to other areas of the world. We are very thankful for the people who have invested in building up the body of Christ.
The gospel truly has no barriers. We have seen God working in the lives of the believers of all ages.
We have seen many come to the Lord or revive their faith in the act of baptism. The churches have all seen growth in numbers and an interest in God's Word.
We praise the Lord for how the light of the gospel has spread throughout sub-Saharan Africa, the Americas, and parts of Asia and Europe. But there are still many regions of our world that sit in darkness.
You can see there's a Japanese man here worshiping the sun. I've seen him 5 or 6 times since we've been here doing this. He seems to have no problem worshiping the sun and at the same time professing that Jesus is the Son of God. He, in some mysterious way, can believe both of those things.
Looking at Japan, we see an incredibly successful economic superpower. But despite all we see on this surface, Japan remains one of the most spiritually impoverished nations on earth. The Japanese are full of superstition, fear, anxiety. The Japanese church doesn't have adequate numbers or resources to evangelize their own people group.
Street preaching is not the most effective in a Buddhist country because the whole different mindset. The Buddhism is so wrapped up in astrology and horoscope that to just go and give the gospel one time is not effective.
In Nepal, when you go to the temples there, it's the Hinduism, it's the religion, it's the dominant philosophy, and it's very dark. It is a spiritual warfare of the highest degree, and the control psychologically, religiously is real.
In this country where we live, people follow millions of gods, and they have little to no exposure to the one true God. And one of the biggest challenges we face in our context is most people see Jesus as a Western God, and they believe that by becoming a follower of Jesus, they have to abandon their culture, families, and way of life.
Another challenge that we face is syncretism, where Jesus becomes one of the many gods that is followed, and it's a struggle.
The culture and mindset of Islam affects people's understanding of the gospel in very real ways. It creates very strong barriers up front, such as a rejection of Christ as the Son of God.
A lot of the girls that we're reaching out to and trying to rescue are girls from places like Afghanistan, some from Iran, some from Iraq. So most of the world that they're coming from has been dominated by Islam. They would have never heard who God is. They would have never heard anything.
There's a lot of obstacles. There's a lot of unreached people. The majority of them are still animistic with Muslim thought process on top of that. And so it's super difficult, and they're spread so thin across rural areas that they're incredibly hard to reach one by traditional means. And so that's one of our major challenges in reaching people for Jesus.
There's so many people, so many who have yet to hear a clear gospel, have yet to hear about what Christ has done for them. And even if they wanted to hear, there's a very little chance they would have the opportunity.
So the huge challenge that the church is going to have going forward is this 1040 window. It's latitudinal or latitudinal line 10 and 40. Between there is this large portion of the world that is not been heavily evangelized. And missions groups, those who engage in messiology, will talk about an unreached people group as something where there's less than 2% who have any evangelical influence. And you're obviously talking heavily about the Islamic world. And the way we've traditionally done missions is not going to get into these countries. We've sent missionaries off to Mexico and off to Ecuador and off to, Central and Southern Africa. And we could get in there. But you can't get into the Islamic world going in as a missionary. You can't get into China. Right now, India is as hostile to the gospel as any place on earth. By the way, the heavy lifting being done by the Indian church is profound. But you understand that India is considered by missionary people who study missions, as being far more unreached than China, than communist China. And that's because there's a church that has exploded in China. Maybe 100 million Christians in China for all we know. It's not clear. But what is clear is there's a tremendous house church movement. In India, it's a great deal of difficulty for our workers there. And they put their lives on the line for the Indian church that is doing the heavy lifting. Let me just give you this, the stats from the World Population Clock. It may be a few days old, but I think there's 8.1 billion people in the world. Today there will be 33 million people, or this year there'll be 33 million people born, and 226,000 will be born today. And this year there'll be 15 million people who die and 102,000 deaths. So the net population growth this year is expected to be about 18 million. And the net population growth today is about to be 123,000. This is a scary stat that 42.4% of the world's population is considered by missions groups to be unreached. And again, we're defining unreached as where there is less than a 2% evangelical presence. By the way, that 2% is pretty generous. There are groups that there's no evangelical presence. So this ought to stir us as a body of believers. That we want to pray that the Lord would raise up workers from our meetings who would go into this part of the world. Again, 42.4% would fall into this role. 19% of CMML missionaries are in that part of the world. So 81% is in other parts of the world. Are we happy about the 81%? Sure. We love the fact that the 81% is evangelizing the other part of the world. But that only 19% of our people are in the places that have really no other gospel witness. By the way, how do you think that compares to other evangelical groups? The Baptists are the best. The Southern Baptists, they have made a real concerted effort to reach this 1040 window, and 3% of their missionaries are there. So relatively speaking, we're not doing too bad relative to the rest of the church. But anyway, so we are, you know this famous quote from Paul, who's quoting from the Old Testament, how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? How are they to preach unless they are sent? We think there's going to be a shift that starts to occur now with the way we think about missions. Doesn't mean we're not going to still do the traditional missions approach. But in order to get into these countries, which are in the 1040 window, you're going to have to go in in some business capacity. This gives you a sense of where these clusters of unreached people groups are. Or it gives you I need to master this slide better. I'm not exactly sure what's filling in here, understand. So, but it's about 3.4 people that are, 3.4 million people of the 8.1 million would be part of these unreached people groups. There's a shift that's going on in missions that business missions is increasingly going to be the way we get into these countries. Christians in the marketplace today are able to gain access more easily to strategic unreached places. Globalization, great advancements in technology, and urbanization have given the business community nearly universal access. That's from a J.D. Greer. And I think we're increasingly going to have to think about ourselves in this way. Is there some way to get in these countries going in as business? Interesting story. My wife taught us she was the head of the elementary education department at Emmaus. It means her job was to teach teachers at Emmaus Bible College for 13 years. You know, she put more missionaries into the mission field than the missionary department did. And that's because the teachers can get into these places more easily. I think we're going to see the same thing starting to occur with the computer science program at Emmaus and the business programs at Emmaus, because you're going to get there. John Peasley is famous for saying the first missionary trip was done by a business guy. Philip was a deacon. And he was sent to the city of Samaria and preached Christ to them. And we know that the Antioch church was largely set up by believers from Cyprus and Cyrene, and they seem to have been business folks who were going there. Get a load of this stat. Right now, American businesses have 2 million Americans in the 1040 window. And again, according to Missions Magazine, we think about 800,000 of these 2 million are professing Christians, and maybe 10% of that number, so about 200,000, might have come from an evangelical background. Imagine if these 200,000 professing believers, if that number is true, and that comes from Operation Mobilization, quotes this stat, as well as another group. If that number is, can you imagine if these 200,000 viewed their job while they're in Saudi Arabia and India and the United Arab Emirates? Can you imagine if they viewed their job as, yeah, I'm getting IBM to pay my rate. My real purpose is to share the gospel. Somebody working for IBM has a lot more protections in the United Arab Emirates than somebody going in under some other type of visa. And anyway, it's a reorientation I think that we as believers are going to have to start to think about. And if you've got somebody who's thinking about going on the mission field, maybe encourage them to think about the 1040 window. I'll give you a little story. We were down in Mexico and on a missions trip for a week. Went with some of the saints from Georgia. And the Rio Blanco area of Mexico, in 40 years, they have founded 39 assemblies. And you know who's setting up these assemblies? It's the other assemblies. The assemblies are planning like crazy. If I had a young couple in our chapel who was thinking about going on the mission field and they came to me and said, hey, we want to go to Mexico. Not that I want to dissuade them from Mexico, but the Mexicans are doing okay. What should you think about these other countries? If you're a teacher, the country's beating your door down to come in. If you're a nursing background, they're beating your door to come in. I went all through the Middle East working for the company I was working for, and those countries were begging us to come in. They're not begging CMML missionaries commended from U.S. assemblies, but they're begging engineers to come in. A great way to... Anyway, so I just think we need to think about this. It's something CMML is spending a lot of time thinking about as we talk to the U.S. assemblies. I'll leave it at that, and turn it back over to Douglas. Okay. So 15-minute break. I guess there's snacks or whatever, and we'll come back in 15 minutes, and then you can ask Doug all the questions you want to ask him. Thanks, Mr. Howard, for your help in the back.